right, so this is part 2 of your lecture for week 7, day 2. So this is continuing after the string quartet that we just listened to in chapter 14. So let's take a look at opera buffa. The opera buffa we're going to take a look at is Don Giovanni. It's by Mozart. So Mozart, we're hearing a lot about Mozart perfecting things, the double exposition and concertos. Mozart also, opera buffa was definitely a style that he helped develop and that he brought to the forefront. So in the 18th century, comic opera grew to be the equal of the importance that serious opera was in the Baroque. So the Roman emperors and the courts and all of those types of figures that we saw, the soldiers and the peasant girls, those type of characters that we saw, castrati having a large role, are no more. With comic opera, simpler plots, happy endings. People didn't want to listen to tragedies. They wanted humor. Love triangles, yeah, still were in there, but in a more humorous fashion rather than someone always ending up dead. The basses, you start to see men's roles becoming more prominent as castrati are not around anymore. That was not as widely an accepted practice as it was before. And in particular, we have what was called buffo basses, or basses that were basically characters that were buffoons. So this Enlightenment, or these Rococo or gallant aspects of natural, lifelike, were things that had to appeal. If you have an opera that is a comedy, it also means that your singer has to act. So there's much more acting involved, not just with the singing. We'll find fewer characters in opera buffa, more tuneful arias. They're easier to sing, they're more familiar. The recitatives are shorter, they're not as long, they get more to the point. The language of the opera is usually always in the country of the composer, so not necessarily always in Italian. Mozart was working in Italy. This one does happen to be in Italian that we're listening to today. So your recitatives are still where the dialogue or the action is still taking forward. The arias are still more static, meditating on a single idea. There's a lot of ensemble, I think more ensemble work than what we saw in opera seria. The action proceeds during the ensemble work. Sentiments of the characters are reiterated with your ensemble work. Da capo arias, there are a few, not as common as what we saw in that Baroque period. Don Giovanni's from 1787. We happened to do it here on campus last May. If any of you were around and went to it, it's a unique blend of comedy and seriousness. It's based on the old tale of Don Juan, that Spanish lover whose goal in life was to see how many names he could put in his little black book. The librettist, so remember that means the person that wrote the storyline, was Lorenzo da Ponte, who Mozart collaborated with quite a bit. We had an interesting take with the Me Too movement on this one. Quite a few opera houses have been putting a Me Too slant on it. When you're looking at doing your paper prompt on a musical or an opera, this might be an interesting one to look at, especially if you can find a staging that's been done in the last year or so. So you've got some comic characters with a servant Leporello, you've got a lot of laughter, you've got rules of society that are being bent, and that's where the humor is going to. Don Juan, or Don Giovanni, as he's called in this case, thinks that he can have his way with most women. The opera ends with him going to hell. We're going to take a look at some scenes here from that first act. I want to point out some of the differences with opera buffa, but also some of the things that are very much the same. So this first clip that we're going to look at is the end of a duet that's taking place between Zerlina and Mazzetto. They are two of the peasant characters that are getting ready for a wedding. Don Juan is going to come in and tell everyone, oh, look, that, you know, what a wonderful person he is and how women flock to him, that he'll be able to steal the bride away with no problem. But it starts with a duet and then it goes into a recitative. Think about whether that recitative is secco or accompagnato, because we still do find that terminology for recitatives happening here in that classical era. And then it's going to go into an aria that Mazzetto, the groom, sings. You've got text on the screen, so when you're watching this on Canvas, you also have the text written in your textbook on page 193. before your written text on 193. That's your groom. So here's some recitative. So this is dialogue. As you listen to this recitative, think about how all that's accompanying it is a harpsichord, so we would classify that as secco recitative. We made that distinction back in the Baroque opera. It's still very speech-like, it's very conversational. They're having a conversation about her promise to marry him, and that nothing will come in the way of that. So it's a fun scene to watch. It ends then with going into an aria for Mazzetto, saying that at least they're free of this Don Juan character that keeps coming and trying to make trouble, and that you were not made for that, you were made for my fate. So if I go ahead a little bit, here's where your recitative ends, and here's your aria. So aria, single character, he's expounding on a single line about Don Giovanni, go away, leave us alone, this is our wedding, we want nothing to do with you. She's promised to marry me. And so this is where on page 193 your book is following with that text. You have one more clip that I have provided for you, and it is the scene that comes right after that. It's a duet. So we start to see a little bit more ensemble work with opera buffa, or classical opera in particular, more duets, more trios. So this is a duet again between Don Giovanni, the Don Juan character, trying to convince Zerlina that he would be a much better fit than this peasant groom that's waiting for her. And he almost convinces her. As you listen to this duet, follow along on 194 or follow the translation that's on the canvas screen when you're watching it. See if you can pick up the word painting. See if you can hear where she starts to give in to his advances with how her line becomes more legato, how it becomes more major. The other thing I'd like you to listen for as you listen through the entire piece is that it's in a strophic form. So these forms that we saw in the Baroque era, they're still around. So strophic means that the different verses are all coming back to that same melody. But with that same melody, can you hear the difference in the story? Where she sounds more confident, where she sounds like she's wavering, where she's making her decision. So Mozart does a very ingenious way of exposing their personalities through the texture of the instruments, through the texture of the accompaniment, through the shape of their line. So this duet, it's a very famous duet. As there's Don Giovanni as she's getting ready to walk down the aisle in her dress, trying to convince her that he's the much better groom. So first they have a conversation about it, so this would be the recitative. and he eventually pulls her into a duet. So, very fun scene. This is a wonderful production that I've put on Canvas. It's nice to have the translations there. I encourage you to follow along on page 194, but very typical of what we see going on with opera buffa. So please remember to take the quiz for today, week 7, day 2. It's open all day on Thursday, April 9th, from 8 a.m. in the morning till 11:59 p.m. If there's anything in this lecture or in the text that is you'd like more clarification on, please don't hesitate to reach out. I hope that you've enjoyed listening to some of these very important classical masterworks. You've got exam 2 coming up next Tuesday. There'll be a study guide posted on Canvas for you. Again, in your study, any questions, please feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to help clarify things for you. There will be no listening questions on exam 2. Thank you.